All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Mattson, and I am your host. In this episode, we bring back my friend John Hewlett, the founder and owner of Cardio Miracle, and good friend. And I'm looking forward to hearing your analysis on things and what you think is going to be, I don't know, what's the outlook of America here after the election?
Well, we'll talk a lot of politics today. We don't need to talk much about Cardio Miracle, but I've had the most extraordinary 2 months of my lifetime. We were involved, you may have known, we were involved with sponsoring the Tucker Carlson Glenn Beck event in Salt Lake City the week after Labor Day. And from that, my son, who happens to be a professional entertainer of great note, I made a part of my sponsorship that he open as the MC or the opening act. I got a lot of pushback, but finally made them do that because I sponsored at such a level. And after 15 minutes, when he opened the show and standing ovation to God Bless the USA, the head of the tour came and said, "Oh my gosh," he says, "we want you for every show." So we traveled all over the country. I don't know if we've even talked since then. Maybe we've done one.
No,
show.
I don't think we've talked about that.
Well, we went all over the country with Tucker Carlson, Russell Brand, Megyn Kelly.
Was Russell Brand involved with that?
Russell Brand.
Really?
I seriously, we should post. I'll have my wife or staff send you the video with me and Russell Brand. It is hysterical. You
didn't do any ice baths with him or anything?
No. But you know what's interesting, Greg, and this is actually a very salient topic. Russell Brand is a born again Christian in the last 7 months. He's gone from being whatever he was, a raunchy comedian, actor, whatever, funny guy, but he is a devout born again. And we actually have a picture of him. He was baptized by Bear Grylls, who was the great adventurer out of England. He was baptized a Christian. And then he is baptizing a friend in his whitey tighties, in his underwear, because they said, "Why are you baptizing somebody in your underwear?" He says, "Because I didn't want my clothes to get wet." He says it was a spontaneous situation. He is absolutely hysterical. And in between his espousing his newfound Christian values and his love for America's freedom, he was at the Phoenix event for Tucker Carlson, and then they brought him back again in Sunrise, which is just outside of Fort Lauderdale, and he was there as well. And I had a chance because my son was the opening entertainer for that. And so any of your listeners who happened to go to the Phoenix event with Donald Trump last Thursday, my son went from 13 minutes, like me forcing him in front of the Tucker team, not Tucker, but the tour director's team, to at the Trump event, he had 45 minutes. And most people felt like his performance was the highlight of the night because unfortunately Trump started rambling a little bit about his good friends Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney, and he gets sidetracked with some of the people that he's not very happy with, and instead of staying on message, he gets carried away, which is really one of his. At least we can say we know he's flawed, but I'll tell you what. We went all over the country with these patriots and these great evangelicals and Christian supporters and a nice group of LDS people. One of the exciting things was, as we got to know Tucker a little bit, is I had a chance to visit with him briefly one of the first nights in his dressing room, and he goes, "Are you a Mormon?" And I said, "I'm a charismatic evangelical born-again member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That's my new pronoun. I'm taking back the charismatic, the evangelical, and the born-again side from our brethren. I'm going to share in that." And I now actually, Greg, have temple sealers, former mission presidents, some of my most conservative, down-the-line, straight arrow LDS brethren and sisters saying, "I want to identify with you. We need to open up the doors." And literally, I don't want to act. It had nothing to do with me, but it really was an inspired approach as I'm working with these evangelicals, because when I identify that when they ask me when I'm Salt Lake, are you a Mormon, et cetera. I say, no, I actually identify as a charismatic evangelical born again member. First thing they say is, when were you born again? And I tell them July 9th, 1970, Melbourne, Australia, which happens to be when I received my testimony in the mission field. And so it is the greatest missionary door opener I have ever seen. And I've spent a lifetime of doing missionary work, but it completely takes the defenses down, completely. And it opens up the opportunity to talk about the nature of God. It's phenomenal. In fact, I was talking to my dear friend, 80-year-old former mission president, former visitor center president, stalwart. And I shared it with him 2 days ago. And he says, John, I should take that to the missionary committee. He said, if the elders knocked on their door and they said, hi, we're representatives of the charismatic evangelical born again membership of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, he said it would be over the moon. And I said, it just came to me, strangely enough, about a year ago on a cruise ship when I was trying to figure out how I could have a gospel discussion with Pastor Jim Ryan, the former mile runner, silver Olympian, guy who got tripped in Munich when he should have won the gold medal, and also 6-term most conservative congressman in America from Kansas. When I met Jim, we were having dinner, and he said to me, he says, Salt Lake, you don't drink, you don't smoke. Are you a Mormon? And I said, well, I identify as a charismatic evangelical born again member of the church. And he goes, when were you born again? And I told him. And that has proven almost without exception to open the door. And we talked, and then then he said to me, I don't know if I hope I'm not repeating myself, but then he said, well, how do you feel about Joseph Smith and the magic glasses? And I said, probably the same way we both feel about Moses parting the Red Sea with a staff. I said, some things we don't understand. He goes, interesting. And I said, do you know what the Book of Mormon is? And he goes, actually, I really don't. For 30 minutes, I was able to tell him the promise to Abraham, the promise through Israel, blessing his son Joseph, the teachings of Abraham being promised to the descendants of the house of Israel, that the Book of Mormon was the record of Israelites that happened to live in the Americas. We won't argue about which part of the Americas, to the Americas, and that there was their history, and they actually testified of Christ. And he was sitting there totally open and blown away, because even though he had served in Congress and had people in his district and everything, he had never had a normal, non-defensive conversation about the church and the gospel. And it has opened up conversations where I was able to even say to him, well, Jim, share with me, why do you good folks ascribe to the Nicene Creed? And they go, oh, well, we follow the Apostolic Creed. I said, well, let's be fair here. The Apostolic Creed is merely an apologist, trying to tie in the Nicene Creed with an apostle instead of a pagan leader who made the political decision to go along with the Nicene Creed. And he goes, well, you probably got a point there. And it opened up the opportunity of talking about the nature of God. One of the greatest, to me, the most significant, one of the handful of significant events of the first vision was the nature of God, and the fact that God answered prayers of a young petitioning Joseph Smith, and that he appeared Father and the Son, which is only logical. We all know it's logical, but our friends on the other side of the aisle of the Christian world, the Catholicism and everything else, they don't have the slightest idea what God is or the Savior is. It's confusing with all of the references and the praying to the Father and the Son and if you've seen me, you've seen the Father, and if we're one spirit, blah, blah, blah. It really has led to some of the most wonderful conversations, and I believe bridge building for people to understand that the gospel isn't the restored gospel 1.0. It's Christianity 10.0 with other additional insights and inspiration that ties to prophets and the gathering of Israel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it gives you opportunity to explain what the temple really is, to explain what all the things that we try to do as a church, and that we don't worship Joseph Smith, that the name of the church is the Church of Jesus Christ. So it's been a really wonderful missionary and patriotic situation, because I believe I just am part of that old school that believes that the founding of our country was divine, that George Washington was shot numerous times in the French Indian War and didn't die, and he should have been. His coat was riddled with bullets. His horses shot out from under him. They crossed the Delaware when they should have all perished. The war should have ended multiple times, and we have a divine right. And that's why I and my company and the things that we're doing, that's why I've supported patriot groups and people who are trying to get us back to the fundamental principles that this is a Judeo-Christian founded country based upon the Lord's divine guidance that allowed us to understand. And this is why it's so distressing when Latter-day Saints become woke and become more concerned about being globalists as opposed to being concerned about being emissaries of the restored gospel and the gathering of the 10 tribes.
Yeah, you talk about bridge building. I was just reading, what is it, Come Follow Me this last week or the week before. I can't remember if it's in the end of Mormon or beginning of Ether with Moroni talking, but it talks about how the Book of Mormon, actually, those that believe the Book of Mormon will believe the Bible. And you look at what's happening with Christianity right now, where it's all of it, all across the board, right? We're losing people left and right. Doesn't matter the denomination. You've got a number of denominations going woke, and that just means that's death, right? To the denomination. But and then you have others that just are falling away. COVID really hurt Christianity in the sense that it was, so much of Christianity and church for anyone is community. And so you knock that out, and then you're kind of like, well, I've even spoken to some members, and they're like, well, I just kind of felt like I didn't need to go back.
It's a playbook.
Yeah, but so you see Christianity kind of dropping, and I think as members of the church, we need to see this more often, right? It's not us and then them completely. I mean, there's some ways you can look at it that way. It is Christianity more broadly. They are part of the prophecies, not just us. They're part of the prophecies. They have the stick of Judah at a minimum, right? We just happen to have both the stick of Judah and the Book of Mormon. And in the Book of Mormon, it says that those who believe the Book of Mormon will believe the Bible. And so
second witness. Exactly.
Yeah, it's a second witness, but it's also, I think, those that may lose faith in Christianity, may lose faith in the Bible itself, can be brought back through by coming through the Book of Mormon.
And there's flaws everywhere. It's really interesting to me. I happened to meet a very prominent pastor last weekend. I was in Yuba City with Pastor Dave Bryan and Cheryl Bryan, two of the finest people I've ever met in my life. I've never met really such loving, Christ-like people. They're taking in the homeless. They're taking in the prisoners into their church. They're taking in the unwed mothers. They're feeding the homeless and the hungry every day. I mean, they are living it at the absolute fantastic. They just are buying a low security prison that is going to be used to help treat and to give comfort and first-class treatment to abused children. They're actually purchasing a facility that is going to be where these abused children are going to be able to go and have a tremendous rehabilitative situation. So these are active Christians. But while I was there, it was interesting. I met a fellow whose father was one of the preeminent evangelists in the country, television, international, out of the South. And he was a contemporary of Pastor Jim Baker, who I now know, and also Jimmy Swaggart, who I don't know. But all three of them ended up at what we used to call, I don't know, I better say maybe I probably shouldn't use the term, but a firing squad where everyone shoots each other, and because they all committed adultery, and yet these were people who have unbelievable records of healings, miracles, evangelical, bringing hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people to Christ throughout the world, and yet they were flawed people, and yet we get so hung up. And there's so many people who are critical of us because they hear of the rogue scoutmaster or the rogue bishop or the stake president or whatever. I have to always look at the characters of one of the podcasts out there that's always saying, this person was a bishop in the church. Well, hey, I was a bishop in the church when I was 26 years old. I mean, that's how desperate they were in Taylorsville in those days. But the reality is, we're all just people. Mm-hmm. You know, we all are sinners. We are all beggars before the Lord. And it's been so interesting to me to be a part of my own revival. And the revival, you know, COVID had all of its problems, but it awakened about 35 to 40% of the citizens of this country. And that's why we saw the result we saw on Tuesday, that from some of those people who finally said, you know what? The prophecies about Gadiantons are true, because guess what? They're everywhere. They're just not the big corporations. They're everything. They're everywhere. And that's what the book says. The Book of Mormon, that most of us ascribe as the cornerstone of our religion. They're everywhere. And we need to discern good versus evil, right versus wrong. And it's not right versus left. It's good versus evil. And if you can't see the evil agenda, that is an agenda that's anti-family, anti-son or daughter of God, specifically, genetically, marriage in the family, you know, really, we need, I don't know how much good they're going to be able to do in the next couple of years, but from my reports, I'm hearing reports on the inside, because I know a bunch of these people there. It's going to shake up Washington and the world to its core in the next few months, because they learned a lot from 4 years ago. And I actually have had kind of this epiphany, because I was really distressed over all the good things that I felt happened from 2016 to 2000 in our world, our economy, et cetera. But there were way too many rhinos. There were way too many people giving bad advice. And the president's a very imperfect person. Let's just say that. But he has some very unique qualities that make him almost the only person who could have pulled this off. And I think personally, it gives us a couple of year reprieve, and we're going to see some interesting things, but we're going to see some violent pushback from the establishment and evil, but as evil increases, Greg, I'm seeing the light increasing, but the space in between is cavernous.
Here's the thing I say, and I think that's all true. I think that there will be a wall of adversity that is trying to come crushing down on everything. There is an establishment. They want what they want already, the powers that they have already, the money that they have already, the positions that they have already. It's not a mistake. And I'm not trying to be partisan here, but it's not a mistake that Washington, D.C. voted 94% for Kamala Harris. That is absolutely insane. You're right. It's like not 60-40, right? It's 94%. But I don't, you know, it's just come out that the FBI released some information that there have been several assassination attempts.
That
have been stopped by the FBI from Iran.
Yeah.
From Iran, right? So there are, and that's just what they've told us. The question I would say is, well, what about other organizations, other countries, others that do not want to have this whole change happen within the country or within the global order?
Right.
I know this for a fact. I had, and you've probably seen this also, but when you look at who is around those events with him, there are the Secret Service, and then there's another group of people that look very different. And they're oftentimes in green or black, and they look like Navy SEALs, and they look like they are absolute veterans. They probably are combat veterans. They carry themselves very differently, and they are walking around, and I have never seen anything like it. It is completely different from the suited, just it's the way they carry themselves is completely different. I think he's going to have to do that. If he doesn't add on additional security, I'm worried I'm worried, John. I don't know. I'm worried he's not going to make it to the inauguration.
Well, a lot of people are, but I know who those people are. I don't claim to be some. I because of my relationship with Dr. David Martin and some other people, I've met some really interesting people, and there's a group of patriots out there that are very well funded from their own circumstance, and they've been essentially engaged for the last couple of years in adding additional layers of protection, and I think that will continue because, the real patriots at their heart realize that this is life and death of people, but also of our country and of our republic. And it really is. And they view things differently. There's some of us that say, well, the second coming is going to come. It's going to get worse. And then the others say, well, no, it's going to take 50 years. But I don't buy that myself. I think all the signs are there that, we're on borrowed time, maybe a 10-year clock or less, whatever. But all I know is that it's a time for people to stand up for what's right and wrong, to teach their children and their grandchildren the principles that they're not getting taught in their schools, and in some cases in their church classes and in the universities and everything else. And you've been really, Greg, one of the illuminating lights on the problems that we've seen at some of our church institutions. And so it's our responsibility. And one of the great things that happened actually on this thing is I saw family members of my own family who stopped thinking I had lost my mind. And they actually, because they listened, they actually went through their own conversion of how serious the problem is that I've been telling them about for the last 5, 6, 7 years.
As you were on this these last couple of months, and you were going around, it was Tucker Carlson you were with.
Tucker Carlson.
Okay. So you're with, and you're traveling around. What are some of the insights you saw with running a campaign? What it looks to me, it's got to be just a massive ordeal of management.
I'll tell you what's one of the most interesting is Charlie Kirk. I had heard about Charlie Kirk. He lives there in part of Phoenix that is like the most dangerous part of Phoenix. He doesn't live there. He lives in Scottsdale like you, but his office is like this barricade. It's almost like a commercial office prison. And I had a tour of the offices. I met his people.
All the video and studio stuff.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, I've been there.
Oh, it's unbelievable.
I know the guy that runs that.
Yeah, and we were there, and they had booth after booth, and they were talking about that their focus was on the 70,000 or the 30,000 people who didn't vote the time before. I mean, they're so precise. There was so much strategy. There's so much money being spent on this grassroots, a lot of it in your state of Arizona that still is having a problem getting the vote counted, which is unbelievable in our country. But see, those things are going to change because the feds now with this change and the good, strong it's going to be very difficult for 1 or 2 senators to hold up the rest now. That's going to happen because Joe Manchin, they'll be, and from a Supreme Court standpoint, oh my gosh, and appointing judges. So there's so many things that were at stake. But when I watched the tactical campaign work of Charlie Kirk's Turning Point organization and Moms for America, they've overturned all kinds of things at the grassroots level. They have hundreds of thousands of everyday housewives, just like the Glenn Campbell song, here are the things of the everyday housewife. Moms for America, one of the great patriot organizations, Kimberly Fletcher, who actually is LDS, active LDS, but the majority of her support shamelessly comes from evangelicals instead of LDS. And she works for practically nothing, has 8 children, grandchildren, and she is on the road 300 days a year trying to save our country. We met some of the most wonderful people, and there are so many people involved in that because I just got a text from my friend who was the former head of ABC4 here in Utah, who's had a conversion since the pandemic. In the middle of the pandemic, he realized that all the stuff that he had been involved in, he was a big shot. And he is like so outspoken in his retirement because he sees the damage. But it was interesting saying Kamala spent $1 billion and it was 20 million in debt. They spent so much money. George Soros, Mark Cuban, all of these people just poured so much money in to try to help prop up this effort, last stand type of thing. And to have it be successful, even with, I'm sorry, call me a conspiracy, there still was election fraud. There's no reason to be mailing in ballots a month ahead. That's nonsense. When are we going to go back? We went in St. George to vote, and there was a line down the street, and we moved in and out of there in a half hour. They were organized to the max. They were phenomenal. So I think we're going to see some interesting things change because now we know what we're dealing with. And it's the thing that's interesting is there's nothing that violates the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the actual documents that were actually written that people have made, that a Supreme Court decision 50 years ago is the Constitution. It's not the Constitution. Roe v. Wade wasn't the Constitution, for heaven's sakes. Any constitutional scholar worth his weight will tell you it had no constitutional basis. It was a political decision. But you know what, Greg? We have a responsibility to stand up for life, to stand up for patriotism. We have a reason to stand up and encourage the brethren, our bishops, our stake presidents. We should be singing the patriotic hymns in our country. They should be singing them in Canada. They should be singing them in Japan. But we don't have to go global as individual congregations, even though the church has a very complex situation. They've got to deal, with the entire global situation.
What do you think is going to happen? You've got, at least for the campaign, Trump put together kind of a very interesting team, right? The Vivek
coalition.
Sure. Okay. Tulsi.
No one has ever done before. No one has ever done before.
But here's the thing. Most of those people outside of Tulsi Gabbard, who was a congresswoman from Hawaii, none of them are Washington insiders.
Which is good.
That might be good. My question is how much of that is going to, there's going to be massive ripples from that. If these are people that are going to be appointed into the cabinet, as an example, right, there's going to be massive ripples on this and a lot of pushback. Well,
the most important one really is Robert F. Kennedy, because he does have Washington experience to the max from the day he was a little boy at his Uncle John's funeral, John F. Kennedy. So he has that. Tulsi has that. There are others that haven't. I'll tell you one thing that's interesting because, Mike Lee gets interesting mixed reviews in many settings in the Republican Party. Mike Lee was at the forefront in Arizona, and he was, frankly, the only one who stood up and tried to do something to help Carrie Lake. And, Carrie's probably going to just maybe fall just barely short. But I certainly, I'd like to have had her, but I'm sure glad we're going to have more than a 1 or 2 person cushion in the Senate, because that makes all the difference for Supreme Court and nominees of cabinet people and everything else. It's going to be slam dunk in almost all cases. But I think the good news is that Trump himself learned a lesson, that he needs to surround himself with different points of view that he can then consider. He's a very decisive, I think, good leader in a lot of management types of things. But, he's going to listen now more to Sarah Huckabee, who, was Sarah Sanders, who was his press person before. Mm-hmm. He's going to listen to Mike Lee. Mike Lee has kind of been on the outs with the rhinos of the Senate. Well, guess what? He's probably, in the top 2 or 3 of all senators now advising President Trump, because he went to the mat in the 2020. He went to the mat again here. He stood up and very likely could be a candidate for the Supreme Court, which would be very interesting.
Or Attorney General.
Or Attorney General. But then again, it comes down to who would or and then maybe there'd be an interesting appointee from Utah. But so we have as a church with Mike Lee and with others involved. There's some good people, and I know some that have already been talked to about cabinet positions, undersecretaries, that kind of stuff. And we're going to have a real influence from the West and from, I believe, Latter-day Saints. I think Mike Crapo from Idaho is highly, highly thought of by Trump and his people. And so we're really positioned much better than we were with our former senior senator from Utah. And also Senator Curtis from Utah is a pretty solid guy from what I've heard. I don't know him. I've met him, but I don't know.
I know nothing about him at all.
He's a pretty conservative, faithful, family values, core value type of person that I think will represent us much better than United Nations globalists and Ukrainian interests and all that kind of stuff. So I think we're going to see some interesting things. We'll probably see some, we've seen a little bit of rioting. Everyone's looking for a good chance to loot nowadays. But I think what'll be interesting, I was predicting a big spike upward in gas prices if the opposition retained control, because they've almost depleted our entire reserves. They forced the price down as much as they could artificially. But now with the technologies and the things opening up the spigot again, at least by February, we're going to see a better economy. We're going to see less inflation. The Fed reduced their interest rates by 0.5 point, but I think they'll get there. But I think we could prepare ourselves that there will be the part of the backlash might be an economic major setback. And so I would say, just because they'll want to make Trump look bad and kind of take away the bully pulpit. So I can see a conspiratorial effort to try to tamp down and have some bad economic things go on, even though the stock market's gone crazy. But the stock market's outrageous. I mean, there's no justification for that other than we have a $35 trillion debt. We keep printing money and they keep putting it in the stock market. So the reality is, I think we're going to see some serious adjustments. So I think the Saints would be wise to have their food storage and be, watch their debt and refinance if they get the chance and do the things that are prudent, because I think they're gonna make it difficult. And if the interesting part is, if depending on who gets appointed as Secretary of State and as the Speaker of the House, now the bullpen, if they do, I mean, I don't know that they would love the enemy, the adversary, I think would love to take Trump out. But hey, let me tell you, J.D. Vance seems to be the real deal. And he actually, I think, cut out of the same bowl of cloth. You never know. We thought John Roberts was a conservative justice, and he turned out not to be as conservative. But you never know. But J.D. Vance, I believe, and then you look down to Mike Johnson and you look at whoever they make. I mean, I think there's some talk that Rubio might be Secretary of State or whatever. We've got a pretty good bullpen of conservatives that even if they, heaven forbid, are successful in stopping the Trump train, now the train's on the track with a lot of extra people and conductors to perhaps keep things going.
So what do you make of the following? There are, I don't know if you've seen the chart, but there's a chart that shows in almost every demographic and geographic area, the country moved to the right. There are two exceptions geographically. One is Washington, D.C., one even higher blue, and Utah. Every other state, D.C. is not a state, but every other voting state moved to the right. What do you make of that?
I think it's the impact of Senator Romney. I think it's part of because I'll be candid to everyone. I find 25% of the things that the president say very, very challenging. I do, personally. I just don't understand it. Now, I don't claim to be some major insider like Jack Anderson, the old days, but the last 5 years, I've been hanging out with some interesting cats, interesting people. And one of them was someone who has been one of the advisors to Donald Trump over years ago, back in the beginning, back in 2014, 15, 16. And one of her comments was, the reason he is the way he is that as soon as he was old enough, he was sent away to boarding school. He was separated from his family. Mm-hmm. So he was a rich kid at a boarding school and had to fight for everything he got. And as soon as he'd come home for the summer, or he came home a little older, his father would send him down to the construction yard and throw him to the wolves and say, don't treat him any different, teach him the ropes. And interesting enough, I just heard yesterday that Don Jr. and Eric Trump, that Donald Trump used to drive them down to the job sites and say to the foreman, give them the hardest jobs you can, and don't call me if they're crying or whatever. He wanted to teach his sons, and that the comment from the person I was talking to was very knowledgeable. He said they knew how to run every piece of equipment. They knew how to run the jobs. He says, because he made them do that. Even though they were going from private school, millionaire status, chauffeur-driven cars, then he'd throw them into the wolves, into the jungle of building those buildings and being a part of those projects. Well, he went from that to being in New York, having to deal with the unions, to deal with the corruption and everything else. He's actually, according to all of my sources, about as nice a guy as you could meet, but he has this image and he has this defense mechanism that he has to do that to kind of protect the fact that he's kind of a softie deep down. But I just cringe every time I hear him attacking anyone, even the dead, the living, the females, the whatever. But you know what? I guess it's probably, and this is a bad example, but it's kind of like how Brigham Young is viewed in a lot of
He
ways.
might be very similar in some ways. I mean, I hate to say that as a comparison.
Well,
it looks like you were a little hesitant also.
Some people would find that, but Lion of the Lord, well, okay. There was certainly plenty of controversy there. So, but again, there were others perhaps through history. I'm sure that Captain Moroni wasn't a softie. Mm-hmm. He wasn't a woke guy.
Well, here's the thing. You don't know even, Teddy Roosevelt was an unbelievably, this is a man, right? This guy, unbelievable, right? And then, but you don't know about those things until years later when you read a biography, right? Because you don't have the social media, you don't have the television, you don't have all of this open. We don't know how many of those men who had risen to the top rose to the top because they had some of that edge to them. And but you don't never hear about it. You don't know about it enough, right? Only the people around him are ever going to know.
Well, think of it, and for example, like General Patton. We hear about Patton just like you would hear about Rush Limbaugh. I mean, when you're outrageous or when you're tougher than normal or whatever, then people are going to remember you more than, General Milquetoast or General Nice Guy or whatever. It's the old thing. And you think of Bobby Knight in sports. You think of the exception in sports was Lavelle Edwards. Mm-hmm. Lavelle Edwards. But Lavelle was firm with his expectation, but he was just a great human being. I guess I've got to be careful attacking dead people, but Rick Majerus was horrific with people, with his kids that he was entrusting. He got great results out of them, but I know that there are many lives that he impacted not to the positive. Some he impacted because he demanded so much that they became better. It's sort of like having a drill sergeant that almost kills you to help you make you stronger. Well, we kind of would like to have sort of the in-between of that. I mean, we all want kids to have a soccer coach or a basketball coach that's tough, disciplined, and that they win, but still they like him instead of hate his guts and want to spit on him when they never see him again. Well,
the question is, I had a tough father, right? I mean, but he was unbelievably loving, unbelievably generous, and affectionate to everybody around him and everything. But he was, one of his biggest identities was when he was a Marine, right? I mean, he held on to that the whole time. And, even at his funeral, he had the Marines, he wanted to make sure the Marines came and did the salute and everything else. And, but in the end, he was a softie. I mean, I haven't seen a grown man cry more than him, but he's the toughest guy I know. Right. But he was also, in the end, he always cared about the well-being of another person. Right. That was really important to him. He might be abrasive, and he was, but in the end, if you were around him long enough, you knew that he cared.
But part of the Marine training was that you'll die for the guy next to you. And so part of that toughness was also a bond of love that is really more about loyalty and devotion than it is about just eros, love, la love. Kind of when you talk about the teddy bear Jesus or whatever. I mean, you think about our greatest exemplar in the world, and then compare the things that Jehovah, which was him before he came to this earth, what things he had to do, the things he had to destroy, the demands that he made through, at least they translated correctly, tenets of the Old Testament. There are some pretty tough rules in that schoolmaster. And so, I think one of the things that we all need to do, the thing that I found ironic is that, back to the Utah vote, I think there were so many people who found Donald Trump's reputation or his past history or his language so offensive, they would vote on the other side, which has more things than I should mention, or else I'll sound too critical. I mean, it's so absurd, the whole aspect that there was even a choice, in my opinion. But it was because I would say 15% of the votes on the other side were more against. They were at least 15 or 20 was against him, not for the other candidate. I think if there would have been a different candidate or whatever, but the reason Trump evokes loyalty similar to George Washington, Geronimo, Custer's Last Stand, The Alamo. I mean, I can still see as a kid that movie in The Alamo on Walt Disney, where Jim Bowie's sitting there and Davy Crockett, and they're shooting and they know they're going to die, but they're going to go down firing. Well, we actually have an interesting situation with Donald Trump, flaws and all. And believe me, I cringe, but I pray and I'm grateful that he's willing to take. This is a swamp full of alligators, crocodiles, rattlesnakes, cobras, you name it. Who would you rather have? A milquetoast, or somebody who goes with the wind of a pole, or somebody whose core values is to at least try to help save and reform America? Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if do you know who McKay Coppins is? I heard the name. I don't. Okay, McKay Coppins is a writer. He's written, I'm trying to think of where he's been. I think New York Times, and then I think The Atlantic is a magazine, and he's LDS. And he wrote an article just yesterday, I think it was, a day or two after the election, that talked about how our standard has moved now from the rhetoric of Donald Trump. Now it's like everything is okay that is said. And I had a little online conversation with him, and it said, coming out with this article just a day or two after, as if this is one of the major issues, is his mouth, it is bizarre to me. Right. I mean, look at what's at stake here, whether you're on one side of it or the other, and you're worried about what he's saying. And I brought up the saying, when we were kids, it's just, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. I want to know what's going to hurt me. I'm not going to worry about the names. I don't worry about that. What I worry about is, what are your policies? That's number one. What are the policies? And do you have the capacity to do it? Right. Those are the two things, because there's a lot of people, and, we know all the politicians that'll lie, and they'll put out their policies and they never get anything done. Right. So it's those two things I think that you have to have. And that's what I came back to him with. Why do you care so much about this? I mean, I understand you're on the other side of the spectrum here, McKay, and you're against his policies. That's okay. That's what your decision is, but it's his policies. Why do you care about his mouth so much? I actually think that a lot of people, even who identify as regular people, not charismatic, evangelical, born again ones, are basically they don't want to make any waves. They don't want to. I have a thing that says, if you don't act, you have acted. If you don't stand up for something, you don't stand for anything. I mean, the reality is, since when was doing the right thing not controversial? Since when was standing up for liberty not? I mean, the most unpopular apostle in my lifetime was Ezra Taft Benson. He was derided. He was ridiculed. He wasn't even accepted by the other members of the quorum at various times. His number one advocate was David O. McKay. His number one advocate was David O. McKay.
Not my favorite prophet.
But when he was ordained an apostle under the hands of the president, I want to say it was Heber J. Grant. He said, your role as an apostle is to uphold the Constitution of the United States. That is your responsibility. And he did that with half of them being moderate Democrats in the quorum, the presidency. I mean, we had all kinds of President Brown, President Tanner, President Moyle. I mean, all kinds of different political persuasions. David O. McKay was a pretty stalwart Republican who actually, I mean, couldn't we all wish that Donald Trump was like David O. McKay? I mean, David O. McKay got along with all the dissident Mormon scholars. He got along with the athletes. He got along with the famous people. He got along with the poor people. I had the honor as a 7-year-old to sit by him at a softball game, an all-church softball game.
Was he wearing his white suit?
He was wearing. He wasn't wearing, because it was a softball game. He always used to wear like beige pants or white pants. I mean, he was always he was Colonel Sanders on parade. I mean, he was unbelievable, and it was so interesting. But he had a twinkle in his eye, and yet we were sitting there, and we were sitting behind the backstop. It's the strangest thing. And he was calling balls and strikes, and he'd turn over to me. I mean, I was 7 years old. And he said, Johnny, I think he missed that one there. I think that should have been a ball. I mean, it was, and I was like, my gosh. And then as I've read about him through the years, I thought, well, that would be great. But we're talking about Donald Trump. And President McKay had to deal with the worst crisis in 50 years in the church ever since Lorenzo Snow, in 75 years, actually. And he brought in Eldon Tanner, who helped kind of bail us out from some serious real estate issues that were going on. But, the reality is we need to pray for our leaders. We need to pray that this imperfect person will listen and get input. Not input that all of a sudden he's going to become a fan of pro-choice versus pro-life, because there are people that he's surrounding himself that probably don't have the same core religious belief that we have on that subject, but that he will listen and look for the innate good. And, people say, well, yeah, but he's going to destroy the economy, destroy the environment. I happen to know there's a technology out there that might be able to replace fracking that could come forward in the next couple of years. Well, again, I like being able to drive my car. I like not having to stop and charge up every time. And the reality is there's so many things that are just not true about the green agenda and everything else. It's a total woke identity agenda. I mean, seriously, everyone should be riding a non-powered bicycle if they really believe in the Green New Deal or whatever. So the reality is we should be responsible. I'm hoping that we see less government. I'm hoping that we see more emphasis on churches taking care of the poor, the charitable, families being responsible for families, empowering families, lower taxes, flat taxes of sales tax on goods or whatever to be able to raise whatever revenue. But why send trillions overseas when our roads, our bridges, our infrastructure, our veterans, our people need help? Why aren't we building communities to put these homeless people, give them meaningful work, let them take care of organic gardens, do some light fulfillment manufacturing, whatever. I mean, why aren't we doing stuff like that? Instead, we're sending money and people why is half of Congress zillionaires? because we're money laundering all over the country, all over the world, and it's easier to launder it out of the country. And that's why the people in Virginia and Washington, D.C. vote the way they vote, because they are part of that defense company cartel that is in the war business and not in the peace.
Ukraine.
The Ukraine and all of it. I mean, it's unbelievable. So I'm encouraged, and I think the fight has just begun. But at least now we're not subject to executive orders like were put out 4 years ago that undid almost everything good that Trump had done in the previous couple of years.
Yeah, I say, it's, of course, when someone's going to be doing more along the lines of what I want done, I say this, but I would like to see a lot of things reversed. I would like to see a lot of I think that he will have, a plethora of executive orders going out day one.
He has to.
But I would also want to have a reduction in the power of the president, because we can't keep swaying back and forth like this. Because you look in, and Mike Lee actually brought this up a while ago, just earlier this year. He said, look, the powers of the president are so great, so enormous, and have such precedence now, that between the executive orders and the arm of the DOJ, all of the executive orders act like law. And so if you can't get anything through the Congress, and you don't think, because it's not the will of the people.
Exactly.
All you have to do is come up with an executive order and have the DOJ back it up, or the SEC or some other governing board that comes in. And look, you've got Title IX. Title IX is full. It acts like law. Everybody has to follow it. There are fines. If you don't follow it, it's.
Yeah. Well, Mike Lee is right. The powers of the presidency through the executive orders has got out of control the last 12 years. Totally out of control. And the Senate's lost their teeth. The problem is the Senate's corrupt and the House is corrupt. When you have people who came in, they're making $250,000 a year, and their net worth goes from $800,000 to $15 million in 4 years. Something doesn't smell right. It's not like they're building an Amway business on the side. There's something going on. And when you have people insider trading, I know people who made a mistake in the securities business that ended up being convicted of crimes and going away. And yet we have probably, I would say, 1,000 securities laws every day broken by members of Congress and broken by people.
It's a club.
It's unbelievable.
It's a club of elitists, and it's got to change. And to me, honestly, John, the biggest issue on the board, and I know Trump ran with this in 2016. I don't know if he did this time, but the biggest issue to me is term limits. You've got career politicians, and I know there's some good politicians, and you want them in there long term, but the benefits aren't good enough to keep these people in there. There's no reason for this. You want people that go and represent your people. Right, not themselves, not their careers.
Yeah, and the staffs are way too big and way too powerful. And what I was going to say is, it's not the will of the people that Congress does; it's the will of the lobbyists that they bribe them to do. And that's the problem. There needs to be a couple of good things. One, let's get pharmaceutical ads off of television.
I was just thinking about that yesterday.
Only country besides New Zealand that allows that. Let's get them off of television, because that's a fraud. Let's also, let's get rid of the regulators that are a revolving door between the pharmaceuticals and the FDA and the FTC and everything else. It's a revolving door. It's an insider's club. The patents are totally corrupt and out of whack. There's so much corruption. It's almost overwhelming. But the good news is that Trump, in spite of his many weaknesses, is at least willing somewhat to bring in other smart people without being threatened by them. Elon Musk and Vivek, these guys are really smart guys, but Trump's a really smart guy. So hopefully knowing this is his last hurrah, he will allow them to give him good counsel and advice and help them, turn loose 20 of them to help clean up all of these different messes that are everywhere to put us on the right track. But again, pain is gain. And whenever you have like an illness, things get worse before they get better. and we've got to be prepared. There's not going to be roses. This is a cesspool mess that is absolutely, we are absolutely, totally and completely bankrupt as a country. And the world is bankrupt. And we've been living on all this fake money all these years. So we really need to reestablish our manufacturing, our natural resources, our employment, and we need to be fair in all things. And we need to reduce the tax burden, which will allow people to invest and hire more people and have prosperity and lower prices. And again, it's been really quite an adventure, and I'm actually frankly exhausted, but I'm thrilled to death that we have a chance to turn this page of the book. I think it's going to be a fascinating couple of years.
A lot of news coming through in the short term here. So,
yeah.
All right, John, thanks so much. Appreciate it. Thanks for sharing your thoughts and your experience here over the last couple of months. And we'll have you back shortly.
Great. And, you know, my sweet wife and I will have to tell you, as funny as that, when we went to the Trump event, I had all of the staffs, all of the people coming up and asking me for cardio miracle samples. We actually have an inside track by the way, we did get approved for HSAs
yes.
and FSAs. That's a big deal. That means anyone who says, oh, it's too expensive, with our subscription and HSA, it's almost half price for the best product, I believe, in the world. The other thing is, we believe now with this group in place that's coming that we're not too far out from getting approval for VA and for Medicare and Medicaid, hopefully in the next year or two, which would really be big. And that's why we beefed up our science to match what's necessary to get those approvals. But it's really been an interesting journey. And I feel so blessed and thank all of those good people with the Cwic Media family. And I've got to get my calendar so I can come on the cruise with you, Greg. I want to do that. So I appreciate it. I'm so proud of all you've done and the clarion voice of reason. You know, everyone doesn't agree with everyone on everything, but thank heavens for people like yourself that are standing up for the principles that I believe the Book of Mormon teach and that were espoused by the prophet Joseph and also by the Lord himself in the New Testament and the Book of Mormon. So thank you for all you're doing and your effort in trying to help bring truth that we all are independently responsible for our own progress. We can't just defer that to somebody else. So thank you for what you're doing.
Appreciate that, John. We will talk to you again soon.
Okay. See you later.